Hello and welcome to this webinar presented by HSB. My name is Matthew and I will be your GlobalSpec moderator, and I want to review a few housekeeping items with you before we begin. Please take a moment to familiarize yourself with the operation of the user interface for today's webinar. The large window with the heading Presentation in the upper left is the primary window for today. Just to the right of the main presentation window is the Speaker Bio window with background information on today's presenter. And just below that is the Q&A window. At any time during the presentation, you can enter a question into the box in the lower section of the window and click Submit. Your question will be placed in the queue to address when we get to the Q&A session. Now we're going to try to answer everybody's questions today. However, if we don't get to your question for whatever reason, we will reach out after the webinar is over. So please send in your questions or your comments. We'd love to hear from you. At the bottom of your screen, you will see additional buttons to enhance your webinar experience. To see what a particular button does, just place your mouse pointer over it and a tooltip will appear with a description of the button's function. And now I'd like to introduce today's presenter. With us today we have Michael Stevenson, the International Code Service Specialist for HSB. To read more about Michael, please look at the Speaker Bio window right next to the main presentation window. And Michael, welcome to today's event. And with that, I will pass things along to you to get started.
Awesome. Thank you, Matthew. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining our discussion on the Indian boiler regulation for pressure vessels. My name is Michael Stevenson, and I will be your presenter today. This presentation will take about 30 minutes and cover some key changes to the regulation that may impact how your company complies with IBR. You'll be able to ask questions through the chat, and our moderator will bring them up so I can address them to the best of my ability. As mentioned, I'm Michael Stevenson, an Inspector Supervisor and Business Development Manager for Hartford Steam Boiler. I'm qualified as a ASME Authorized Inspector and an International Code Service Specialist. With a focus on international code requirements like IBR, I've been working in this field for over 15 years. Let me give you a little bit of background on HSB now. HSB is the largest authorized inspection agency accredited by the American Society of Mechanical Engineers and has grown to be a worldwide leader in the interpretation and application of boiler and pressure vessel codes, standards, directives, and client specifications. With local representation and jurisdictional experience, we provide virtually every aspect of inspection and certification mandated by the ASME codes and regulatory bodies. HSB has more than 450 engineers, inspectors, and auditors around the world with over 150 years of engineering experience who are highly qualified to help you meet local and international code requirements worldwide. HSB is highly proficient in codes and standards from around the world, and we provide the most qualified and experienced inspectors in the industry and are committed to the highest ethical standards. Here's the agenda for the webinar today. We will examine key changes impacting fabrication efficiency, explore new cost-effective ways to procure material, and have a summary of important information to save you time. So to get started, let me give you some important definitions from the Indian boiler regulations. IBR applies to all boilers, including natural circulation, forced circulation, with no fixed steam line and water line. The CBB, or Central Boiler Board, is a body that defines the requirements and legalizes the current version of the requirements. The CIB, or the Chief Inspector of Boilers, are the government-appointed officials in each of the states in India that handle the exemptions and exceptions, but mainly review the installations and may question any deviations from requirements. The Indian Boilers Act of 1923 is the act to consolidate and amend the law relating to the steam boilers that adopted the IBR 1950 requirements. The 2022 draft proposed significant changes that put out for comments but was not officially approved by the CBB. We are going to be discussing these changes today. The IBR Codebook reseller in India has published a 2024 version of the standard but to the best of our knowledge, that doesn't include the changes proposed by the CBB in the 2022 draft. The best guidance we can offer is to review the IBR website for the requirements and approval amendments, for the approved amendments. Before anyone asks, it's possible to ask CIBs to accept some of the 2022 regulations for your project, but it is unlikely they would risk allowing the exceptions. In our experience, it is very uncommon to get CIB to allow exceptions. So where does HSB come in? We are authorized by the CBB as an inspecting authority, an institution recognized in such a manner as may be prescribed by regulations for the inspection and certification of boilers and boiler components during manufacture, to provide the required inspections and reviews needed to comply with the IBR on the behalf of the CBB. HSB employees, competent persons, means a person recognized in such a manner as may be prescribed by the regulations for inspection and certification of boilers and boiler components during manufacture, erection, and use, both inside and outside of India. We hold two separate accreditations. In both cases, the competent person has to be trained, experienced, and pass performance exams. Now that we've covered the initial regulatory updates, let's move on to specific changes and clarifications regarding the Indian Boiler Regulation of 1950. Number system changes. Firstly, the IBR has updated its numbering system. This might create some confusion with experienced personnel reference sections without their descriptions. It's crucial to familiarize yourself with these changes to maintain clear communication and compliance. Appendix reclassification. Next, we see a significant update where Appendix G now replaces Appendix J. The appendix deals with the inspection and testing of boilers, boiler components, and other parts during manufacture. Understanding this change is vital for those involved in these processes. Alternative construction codes. Regarding the construction codes, while it is permissible to use code other than the IBR, it is important to note that you need approval from the Chief Inspector Boilers in the respective state of installation. This requirement is detailed in Section 34, subsection 3 of the Indian Boiler Act. The approval process ensures that all alternative codes meet the stringent safety standards. Adherence to the IBR design references. When it comes to design, all IBR references must be strictly followed. This compliance is non-negotiable to ensure that all safety and regulatory standards are met. Inspection authority and approval. Additionally, it is mandatory to obtain approval from the designated inspection authority. This step ensures that the procedures and installations adhere to the regulatory framework. Specific boiler requirements. Lastly, we have a specific requirement for certain boiler types. Fired boilers with a steam generated capacity of 100 tons per hour or more, and waste heat boilers with a capacity of 20 tons per hour or more must undergo review by both the Central Boiler Board and the CIB. This dual review process is crucial to ensure that high capacity systems meet all necessary safety and performance standards. Having discussed the inspection requirements, let's now focus on the specifics of material procurement under the updated Indian Boiler Regulation of 1950. Preferred procurement from well-known manufacturers. Firstly, it is still preferred to procure materials from a well-known maker who can provide the appropriate Form 4. This ensures that the materials meets the necessary quality and regulatory standards, simplifying the approval and the inspection process. Regulation 5A application. However, in situations where procuring material directly from the mill is not feasible, Regulation 5A provides alternative options. There are two key sections under the regulation that can be applied. Section 1. This section allows for the use of materials that are fully identifiable and supported by a material test report. This ensures traceability and verification of material properties. Section 2. Alternatively, materials that are fully identified with mill markings for a production lot but are not supported by material test reports can also be used. While this provides some flexibility, it still maintains the level of traceability and quality assurance. Inclusion of ASME and ASTM materials. Additionally, it's important to note that certain ASME and ASTM materials have been added to the permissible list under the IBR. However, not all materials from these standards are allowed. For example, materials like SA213, TP304 are included, providing more options for material selection while we still adhering to regulatory requirements. Qualification of welders. Firstly, it is now mandatory for welding operators to be qualified. This change ensures that all welding activities are performed by individuals who meet the necessary skills and competency standards. Revised qualification range. The range of qualification for welders has also been revised. This means that the criteria and standards for qualifying welders has been updated to align with the current industry practices and safety standards. Electrode and material classification. Additionally, both electrode and material classification have been revised. Previously used designations have now been updated to a new system. Electrode designations are now referred to as U numbers, and material designations are referred to as M numbers. This change aims to standardize classifications and improve clarity. Qualification of welding plates. Moreover, many welding or welding operator who pass the test for groove welds in plates will be considered qualified for making welding plates. This ensures that those who meet the stringent testing requirements are certified to perform the critical welding tasks. What has not changed? It is important to note that certain requirements remain unchanged. Specifically, both theoretical and practical tests must be performed for welding qualifications. These tests ensure that all welders and welding operators possess both the knowledge and hands-on skills necessary to perform their duties safely and effectively. I'm going to take a minute and let you guys see the commonly used IBR forms. And here is a list of commonly used IBR forms. Take note that there are many forms, and HSB can help you navigate these forms if needed. Before we wrap up the main portion of this webinar, as I said in the beginning, HSB provides a number of services related to inspection and compliance of pressure vessels, including transportation services like DOT and the carriage of dangerous goods, Pressure Equipment Directive, aka PED, ISO 9001 certification, and other third-party inspection services. So in conclusion, IBR changes have been occurring and are coming. Some of the changes might impact your compliance activity. Get familiar with the changes to ask for help, stay compliant, and if needed, contact the CIB where the equipment will be installed for direction and or accepting a higher standard. At this time, let's go through some of the questions that came through. If I don't get to your specific question, please know that we will respond to you later.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael, for that great presentation. To the audience, as Michael said, we're now moving into the Q&A. You may have some questions about the upcoming changes here. If you do, you can add that to the Q&A box on your screen and click the submit button. Now, we're going to try to answer everyone's questions today. However, if we don't get to your question, we will reach out after the webinar is over. So please send in your questions. And before we jump into that, I also just want to quickly mention on your screen, if you haven't already noticed, in the bottom right-hand corner, you can schedule a meeting with the HSB team. So if you have questions about today's webinar, about the regulations, or anything else that may be on top of mind, we do encourage you to reach out to the team and schedule a meeting, and you will be provided with expert advice there. Okay, let's get into the questions. And our first question for today is, are the documentation requirements identical for welding operators as welders? Michael?
Oh, Matt, that's a great question. And just to repeat it, and make sure that everybody heard it, that documentation requirements, are they identical for welding operators as well as welders? So Regulation 434 is where we start with this. Manufacturers or repairers of boilers shall maintain a record of all the welding personnel engaged on welding and repairing of boilers and steam pipes. This record shall be produced to the inspecting authority and the competent person on demand. If welding operators weld under their own responsibility, they are responsible to maintain the above records. You also have Regulation 421. Form 13 shall be issued by the competent authority. And Regulation 424, the certificate renewal may be extended after 21 months in the case of the welding operator is continuously engaged in qualified process and certified by the organization. Thank you, Matt.
Nice one. Thank you. And thank you for that question. Okay, moving on to our next question from the audience. Also to do with, have requirements changed for the recertification of welders and welding operators?
Okay, so the change for recertification. So back to Regulation 424, the answer is going to be no. The certificate renewal may be extended after the 24-month case for the welder and welding operator if he's continuously engaged in a qualified process and certified by the organization.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And to the audience, we are in the Q&A. You can still send your questions in now by typing that in the Q&A box and clicking submit. Okay, now for our next question. Have requirements changed for well-known suppliers?
Again, another great question, Matt. That the well-known suppliers is one that we've been getting a lot of questions on. So the answer is no. There is a change to procuring materials directly from the mill due to small quantities. Regulation 5A, the two sections have been defined: materials fully identified, supported by a materials test report and by a material manufacturer, but not covered by a form under these regulations. The inspecting authority must be satisfied that the material specification and regulation requirements have been met. A Form 4A shall be prepared and signed by the manufacturer and inspecting authority. Then you also have materials fully identified with mill markings for a production lot, but not supported by material test reports and forms under these regulations. Materials shall be tested as per material specification and regulation, and the number of samples are determined by the inspecting authority. A Form 4A shall be prepared and signed by that manufacturer and the inspecting authority for that also.
Excellent. Thank you for that. We had a few questions come in asking if this was available as a replay. Yes, it is. The entire webinar, including the Q&A that we're in now, will be available as a replay on the GlobalSpec site over the next 90 days. You can use the same link that you used today to access the replay. And I understand there's a lot of great information in here. You're probably going to want to rewatch this one. Okay. All right, and back to the questions. And here's our next question from the audience. When testing material not from a well-known supplier, what are the requirements?
Okay, so the testing material from a not well-known supplier. Okay. That's going to fall under Regulation 5A. Again, those materials shall be tested as per the material specification and regulation, and the number of samples are determined by the inspecting authority. Just like before, a Form 4A shall be prepared and signed by the manufacturer and the inspecting authority.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Okay, looks like we have one more question in the queue that we're going to answer for today, during today's session. However, if you did send in the question and we didn't get to it, we will reach out after the webinar is over. And if anyone has any last questions or comments, now would be a good time to send them in. And again, you could type that information in the Q&A box in the center of your screen and click the submit button. And one last mention to some of the additional content on the screen. You may have noticed we have a few resources in the resource list on the top right. And of course, we have the schedule a meeting widget that you can access now. Okay, but for now, this will be our last question for today's session. Is HSB a recognized inspecting authority per the Central Boilers Board?
Oh, that's a great question. It's one that I'm glad we get to go over again there, Matt. So HSB actually has 2 certificates of approval for the inspecting authority. One is for the whole of India, while from the CBB, and then we also have one for all countries except for India from the CBB.
Excellent. And yeah, great question. Okay, that was our last question for today. So we are going to wrap things up right there. So once again, Michael, thank you so much for the great presentation and also taking the time to answer some questions from our audience. And we'd like to thank our audience members for being part of this event. You will be receiving an email from us with a link to the on-demand version. So as I mentioned, you can come back and watch this again or share it with your team or your colleagues. And if you could, before you leave, if you can complete a survey, which will appear on your screen at the end of this live webinar. And for on-demand viewers, you can find the survey located along the bottom of your attendee console in the survey widget. Again, thank you for taking the time to attend this webinar event. Take care, and we will talk with you soon.